Hi there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Mama's Masterpiece. To my subscribers, thank you for being here. And if you're seeing this channel for the first time, you're welcome as well. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I recreated this Pinterest-inspired pencil dress using an underbust effect pattern. I had already gone ahead to draw my lines, my starting line, which is also my shoulder line, shoulder to bust point to underbust to waistline to hip line and to my knee line. I also draw my chest line from my shoulder to my chest line. So at this point I'm trying to get to my armhole curve. So on my chest line, I'm taking my round bust circumference divided by 4, and then I'll mark it on the chest line, and I came down by the shoulder slope and I'm going in by 0.75 inches on the midpoint of that line, and I'm connecting to get my armhole curve. So I use a neck width of 3.5 inches. And now for the dart, I'm going to measure my bust band measurements divided by 2, which is 8 inches divided by 2, and I'll mark it out on my bust point line, on my underbust line, on my waistline, and on my hip line. But on the hip line, I'm going to go up by 1 inch. So 1 inch above my hip line, that's where I'm going to mark my bust band measurement. So from there, I'm going to connect it with a straight ruler upwards to the bust point. After connecting the straight line upwards, on the underbust line, toward the side, I'm going to go outward by 1.5 inches towards the side of the pattern paper. And then toward the midpoint, I'm going to go outward by 1 inch. So this is just going to give you that snatched effect under your bust and give your bust some structure. Then on the waistline, I'm going to go outward on each side of the line by 1 inch. And then I'll use my curve rule slightly to curve it from that underbust to the bust point upwards. I'll connect this other side as well. And then I'll use a straight ruler to connect it downward to the waistline. So I went out by 1 inch on the waistline. And then from there, I'm also going to slant it down to the 1 inch above my hip line. So this is going to form my dart for the front. So this is just a whole underbust effect. So now I'm going to go ahead to take my body circumference measurements. So on the chest line, I'll be taking my round bust measurement, which is 9.75 inches, and I'm just going to add 1 inch allowance. So I'm adding just 1 inch because the fabric I'm using is stretchy. And I'm coming down to the waistline. I'm going to take my round waist measurement divided by 4, that's 7.5 inches, and then I'll replace the dart intake on the waistline, which is about 2 inches, and then I'll go ahead to add 1 inch for the sewing allowance. So I'm going to go ahead to mark my measurements on my hip line as well. So for the hip, I'll divide it by 4 as well, my hip circumference divided by 4, which is about 10.25, and then I'll add 1 inch for the sewing allowance. Then I'm going to connect the points together. So from the chest line to my waistline and then down to my hip. After connecting, I'm also going to use my curve rule to connect from the waist downward to the hip line, and then on the knee line, my calculated hip measurement, that is my hip circumference measurement divided by 4 minus 1.5 is what I'm going to mark here. So my hip circumference divided by 4 minus 1.5 is 8.75, and then I'm going to add 1 inch as well for the sewing allowance. And then I'll connect with a straight ruler downward to the end of the dress. So if you're wondering why I did not take measurements for my underbust, right, I just took measurements from my waist and connected it all the way to the chest line. And the dart intake on the underbust is wider because this side is 1.5 and this side is 1 inch, and on the waistline is 1 inch. If you're wondering, maybe it will be short by the time I'm done. So my underbust measurement is also 30 inches as my waist measurement. So 30 inches divided by 4 is 7.5 inches. So I'll just mark 7.5 inches there. And then the dart intake is 2.5 inches on the underbust. And from that 7.5 inches, I'll measure 2.5 inches. And I'm working with an allowance of 1 inch. So I'm going to just take the 1 inch allowance. So everything adds up. But if your underbust is maybe wider than your waist, please go ahead to take your underbust dart intake on the underbust line. So moving on to work on the neckline. So earlier I said that I took a neck width of 3.5 inches. And now from that 3.5 inch point, I'm just going to connect it as a V down to the chest line, just like your drafting out a V-neck pattern. So just connecting it down to the chest line as a V. And then on that V line point, I'll go up by 2.5 inches. And then I'm going to connect from that 2.5 inches above the chest line into the armhole. So I'll just use a straight ruler to connect it into the armhole and blend it in properly. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and cut out my pattern. So I'll start by cutting out the sides of the pattern all the way to the top. So getting to the top, I didn't cut through the pattern paper. I'm not trying to waste it because I'm going to use that part later. And then I cut downwards to the V. Please go ahead to watch it again in case you didn't see it. And then I'm just going to cut out that small V part. And I'll go ahead to divide the top from the skirt part because I'll be closing the dart on the skirt part. And to also make it easier for me to hold the dart on the top part. So I'm going to go ahead and extend down my dart line all the way to the top. I'm not going to be taking any bust tightening here. It's just a straight line. I'm just opening it up so that I can hold the dart properly. So I'll go ahead and just label one side the center front and the other side the side front. So I went ahead to start cutting out the dart. So while I was cutting this out, I realized that I had not taken my side dart. So I'll go ahead to take my side dart measurement. So my shoulder to waist on the front of my front body is 17 inches and my shoulder to waist behind is 15.5 inches. So 17 inches minus 15.5 inches is 1.5. So my side dart is 1.5. So for my bust line, I'll go down by 1.5 inches and connect it into the point, into my bust point there where the dart is. And then I'll go ahead to close it because I won't be sewing this on my fabric. So I'm just going to close it down. I hope you understand. Then after closing it, I'll use a tape to just secure it down in place and I'll continue cutting out the rest of the pattern. So while I was on closing it, I realized that there's not so much shortage. So there's no need for me to replace anything by the side. So I cut out the rest of the dart and then I went ahead to close out the dart on the skirt part. I also used a tape to secure it down properly. And I was done with the front piece. And now I'm going ahead to work on the sleeve and shoulder because it's a cut together shoulder and sleeve. You can call this a ruched sleeve. So I'll extend the starting line up to the end of the pattern paper, just straight down, and then from that starting line point at the edge, I'll come down by 1 inch and I'll connect that 1 inch to the neck width point, not minding the shoulder slope. I'll just connect it straight down into that neck width. So I'm going to just use my tape for some kind of reference to get a straight line, and I'll just mark some points. Then I'll use my ruler to just connect it straight from the 1 inch below the starting line on the edge into the neck width point. Don't worry about the shoulder slope anymore. And now from here, I'm going to go ahead and measure my sleeve length. So from that shoulder point down to where I want the sleeve to stop is about 23 inches. But what I have on the pattern paper is about 21 inches or so. So I'll just work with what I have. I'll just mark 20 inches down there. And then I went ahead to measure from my shoulder to my biceps. You know when you're cutting out a normal regular sleeve, shoulder to biceps, and then from my shoulder to where I want the sleeve to stop, which is my forearm. So I marked that point. My shoulder to biceps is about 5 inches and I marked it there. And then I marked my shoulder to my forearm. And now I'm going to take my biceps circumference measurement. So round my biceps is about 13 inches divided by 2, 6.5. That's what I've marked there. And now I'm marking my forearm circumference measurement, which is about 11 inches. And then 11 divided by 2 is 5.5 inches. Because this is going to be cut. Just imagine this is on a fold because I'm going to fold the fabric when I'm cutting this out. So it's going to, this particular pattern I'm making now is going to be for the back and the front together for one side of the body. You get? So from that armhole point, including the armhole, including the allowance on the chest line, from the armhole point, I'll just connect it into that biceps circumference measurement and then all the way to the end, which is my forearm circumference measurement. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So just watch closely. I'm just using my ruler to make the lines more visible and straighter. Now on that armhole point, I'm also going to label the armhole point just so that I'll not be confused later on. So I'll just label it armhole and I'll cut out the line. So from the end, I'll just cut it straight out, following the small curve that is there into the armhole, just like this. And then I'll also go ahead to cut out the top from the 1 inch below the starting line. I'll cut it out. I already cut out the starting line, so I'm just cutting this other line out, just like this. So after cutting this out, I also cut out the V in front. I should have cut this out earlier, but it still works now. So cutting that out, this is it for the top, the shoulders and the sleeve together. So I'm just going to relabel it my biceps point and my forearm point. I hope you get to this point. So I'm just going to go ahead and make some slash lines because I'll be doing some slashing and spreading for this top part. So I'll just draw lines all the way from the top downwards. It doesn't have to be straight, it could be slanted, just freestyle with it. So taking the lines from the top downwards, and this is what I have here. I'll slash the lines now. I'm not slashing all through. I'll just stop at maybe 0.5 or 0.25 inches from the top. So I'm just slashing all the way to the top, not cutting the entire paper. The spreading is not going to be so much, so as little as can spread, I'll work with that. And now I'll go ahead to work on the back piece. I had already drawn out my lines, my starting line, chest line, bust point, waistline, and hip line. Now the shoulder to waistline on my back piece is 15.5 inches, like I said earlier, but my front is 17 inches. There is no underbust for the back. Those are the differences between the front and the back, and including my zip allowance as well. So here I'm just bringing that top piece to just take where the V effect in front started from. So I'm just going to mark it there. It's just 2.5 inches above the chest line, but I just decided to bring that to show here. And then I'll just connect it just like I did for the front. And I don't need that top part because what I cut out for the front, the shoulder and sleeve for the front, is what is going to cut out the back as well. And now I'm going to take my dart measurements for the back. So on the bust point line, on the waistline, and on the hip line, also 1 inch above the hip line, I'll be taking my bust band measurements divided by 2, which is 8 divided by 2, that's 4 inches. I'll connect it straight from the 1 inch above my hip all the way to the bust point. And then on the waistline, I'll just go out by 0.5 inches on each side. This is just a basic dart, and I'll connect it just like this. And then this is it for the dart for the back piece. So I'll go ahead and take my body measurements. So my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'll add 1 inch. And then my waist circumference divided by 4, also add 1 inch. You can add 2 inches just for your dart, but the fabric I'm using is very stretchy. And then my hip measurement divided by 4 as well, and I'll add 1 inch. And on the knee line, the same thing I did for the front. My hip calculated measurement minus 1.5. So my hip is about 10.25 minus 1.5 is about 8.75. So you just subtract 1.5 inches, and then I'll be adding the 1 inch for sewing allowance. So I'll connect the points together, my chest line to waistline, and then my waistline to hip line using my curved ruler, and then from my hip line all the way down to my knee line. And with a straight ruler, I'll go from my knee line straight down to the end, just straight, no curve. So this is going to give you that pencil effect. Just try it out. Now going to the zip allowance on the waistline, I'm going to go outward by 0.5 inches. So my zip allowance I took is 1 inch. So I'm going to go outward by 0.5 inches and connect it all the way to the top, just stopping somewhere above the chest line. And then on the hip line, on the zip allowance, I'll go up by 1 inch and go down by 1 inch, upwards by 1 inch, down by 1 inch. Now from that zip bulge curve on the waistline, the 0.5 inches, I'll connect it to the 1 inch above the hip line, just like this. And then the 1 inch below the hip line, I'll connect it into the knee point. Just watch what I'm doing, please. So from that knee point all the way to the 1 inch below my hip line. So this is going to give your back some extra curves and stuff. So yeah, this is it for the back piece. I'll go ahead and cut out the sides, and then I'll also cut out the neck part, and then I'll cut out the zip allowance or the zip bulge intake. At this point, I was contemplating if I should cut that stuff out. I eventually did, but not yet. So I went ahead to cut out the zip allowance, and then cut it out all the way to, see, I didn't cut through, then I cut all the way to the knee point, and then from this knee point I cut down, I cut everything out. So if you use this pattern, it's going to give you a very penciled effect, but it's still going to be comfortable. And then I went ahead to divide the top from the skirt part, because I will be closing this dart for the skirt part as well for this back piece. I used the tape to just hold it down, and then I went ahead to cut out the papers on the fabric. So this is a crepe fabric I'm working with. It's stretchy, and this is an organza fabric that I'll be using for the shoulders and sleeves together. I folded my fabric into two. I placed the center front by the edge and the other two pieces by the other side. I'll be cutting out two pieces for each of the fabrics, except the center front, which is on a fold. So at this point, I decided I was going to cut this out because I didn't want it to give me issues when I am trying to put my zipper. It doesn't affect any other thing. So I cut out that part on the chest line, and then I added 0.5 inches to the side. And then I went ahead to cut the rest of the pieces out. I started by cutting out the center front piece. I went ahead to add 0.5 inch allowance to the V opening at the top. And then I cut out the sides. I didn't add any allowance to the side because it already has my sewing allowance. So this is me just cutting everything out, including the back piece as well. After cutting the top pieces, I went ahead to cut out pieces for the front and the back skirt. Then after cutting it out, this video already got too long, and I'm going to stop here. And in my next video, I'll be sharing how I cut the shoulders and sleeves together, the ruched sleeve, and I'll also be sharing the sewing tutorial for the rest of the dress. Thank you so much for staying up to this point. To those who have subscribed to my channel, I'm so grateful to have you here. Please, if you found this video helpful, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.